"You are evil," my 8-year-old daughter said, pressing her face into the neck of another woman. I stood in the doorway of my own living room. The heavy, gold foil-wrapped birthday box slipped from my fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. My hands felt entirely numb, as if the blood had stopped flowing past my wrists. The air in the house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, a familiar scent from a candle I had bought before I deployed, but the woman holding my child was a stranger. Lucy had run right past me. I had just spent 8 months as a logistics officer at an overseas military base, coordinating massive supply chains, counting the hours until this exact moment. I was 38 years old, and I had survived the crushing distance by imagining this reunion. But my daughter did not look at me. She buried her face in the blonde woman's shoulder. "Mom," Lucy whispered, clinging tighter to the stranger. "Make her leave." I could barely hear my own breathing over the rushing sound in my ears. I watched my little girl turn her head just a fraction. Her eyes darted toward the leather recliner in the corner of the room. She was looking at Travis. She was waiting for his approval. Travis, my husband of 12 years, leaned forward in his chair. He was holding up his smartphone, the camera lens pointed squarely at my face. "Welcome home, Megan," Travis said. His voice was smooth, perfectly measured, lacking any of the warmth he used to fake for the neighbors. He tapped the screen of his device, making sure it was recording every second of my reaction. "You are upsetting her. You need to get out." The blonde woman stepped backward, pulling Lucy carefully behind her legs. She was acting out the role of a protective mother shielding a frightened child from a serious threat. I was the threat. Travis stood up, picked up a thick stack of stapled papers from the glass coffee table, and walked toward me. He shoved the document against my chest. The sharp edge of the paper scraped against my collarbone. "These are custody papers," he said, speaking loudly and clearly for the video recording. "I filed for sole custody yesterday. You have been gone for 8 months. She does not even know you anymore. Once the judge signs this order, I control her $8 million trust. Get out of my house." My fingers gripped the thick stack of paper automatically. The trust. My father had left Lucy that money before he died, setting it up with a corporate trustee to ensure her future was secure. Travis had never cared about the logistics of child rearing before I deployed. We had a temporary parenting plan in place, a routine we had agreed upon. I had even sent him a text message 10 minutes before the taxi dropped me off, telling him my exact arrival time because he claimed Lucy wanted to wait right by the front door. They had known exactly when to start the camera. They had known exactly where to stand to block my path. Anger flared behind my ribs, a hot and sudden spike that made my jaw ache, but the red recording light on his phone was blinking. He wanted me to scream. He needed a video of an unstable, aggressive military mother terrifying her young daughter to show a family court judge. I looked at Lucy. She was trembling slightly, her small hands gripping the blonde woman's beige sweater. "I am going to leave for tonight," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I will not fight in front of my daughter, but I am not abandoning her, and I am not abandoning this house." Travis smirked. He lowered the phone, just a fraction of an inch. I pulled my own phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I forced my thumbs to type. I sent Travis an email right then, carbon copying my own personal address to lock in the timestamp on a secure server. I typed that I was leaving the marital home temporarily to de-escalate his hostile behavior, and that I expected a phone call with Lucy at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. "Check your email," I told him, looking straight into the camera lens. "I will call her tomorrow." "She does not want to talk to you," Travis replied. But the smug expression faltered just a little when his pocket chimed with the new email notification. I turned around and walked out the front door, leaving the gold-wrapped decoy birthday gift on the floor where it fell. I walked into the attached garage to retrieve the 2 heavy duffel bags I had left by the taxi. The air in the garage was stale, smelling of old motor oil and damp concrete. As I reached for the canvas strap of my bag, something bright caught my eye. Sticking out from beneath the heavy plastic lid of the recycling bin was a blue envelope. I pulled it free, wiping away a smear of dirt. It had a military base postmark dated 3 months ago. It was a handwritten letter I had sent to Lucy. The seal was completely unbroken. My chest tightened until it was hard to draw a breath. I pushed the large bin aside. Behind it sat a large, opaque plastic storage tote, pushed into the shadows near the water heater. I unlatched the lid and pushed it open. Inside were dozens of envelopes, postcards, and 3 small care packages I had mailed from overseas. None of them had been opened, not a single one. For 8 long months, Travis had told me our daughter was just too busy with school projects and weekend playdates to write back. He said she was adjusting, doing well, just distracted. I did not grab the box. I did not take the letters out of the garage. If I took them now, Travis could claim I stole them, or worse, that I brought them with me to plant false evidence. Instead, I pulled out my phone again and took 5 clear, focused photographs. I made sure the location data and timestamp settings were active on my camera application. I photographed the unopened mail, the tracking numbers on the cardboard packages, and the exact hidden position of the tote behind the trash. I slid the single blue envelope back exactly where I found it, leaving it hanging out of the bin. I picked up my heavy bags and walked out into the humid Virginia evening. I checked into a base lodging facility an hour later. The assigned room was small and dim, smelling faintly of industrial bleach and stale carpet. I dropped my bags by the door, sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, and watched the digital clock on the bedside table. At exactly 8 o'clock, the precise time I had called Lucy every single Sunday for the entire deployment, I dialed Travis's number. The line rang twice. Then it went straight to a generic voicemail greeting. A moment later, a text message appeared on my screen from my husband. It read, "She is crying and does not want contact with you. Stop harassing us." I stared at the glowing letters on the screen. I opened my call history application and scrolled back through the months of records. So many missed calls. So many declined video chats. Travis had always offered a reasonable excuse. Lucy was at a friend's house. Lucy was in the middle of a complex homework assignment. Lucy was tired and went to bed early. I sat in the quiet, sterile room and felt a cold clarity settle over my mind. How many times had my daughter actually refused to speak to me? And how many times had the man I married simply pressed the decline button while she was playing in another room, completely unaware that her mother was trying to reach her? I stood up, walked over to my duffel bag, and unzipped the main compartment. I reached past my folded uniforms and pulled out a second box. It was a sturdy wooden keepsake box, roughly the same size as the decoy gift I had dropped in the living room. Inside this wooden box were 8 handwritten letters, one for every single month I had been forced to be away from home. I had written down funny stories from the base, drew small pictures of the planes, and promised her I would be standing in our hallway for her 8th birthday. I left the brass latch closed. I wanted Lucy to be the first one to break the seal. As I ran my hand over the smooth, polished wood, my phone screen lit up brightly against the dark bedspread. It was an automated security notification from our shared family account. Travis had always been lazy with technology passwords, and he had forgotten to remove my administrative access to the household tablet. That tablet never left the house. It stayed connected to our home wireless network, completely synced with Lucy's restricted child account. The notification was simple and devastating. It stated that a device on our home network had just initiated a mass deletion of the communication history. I watched the alert fade into the dark background of the screen. He was scrubbing the family tablet right now. He was making sure there was no digital record of my incoming calls, no trace that I had ever tried to be a mother from 1,000 miles away. Someone was not just keeping me away from Lucy. Someone was erasing the proof that I had ever tried to reach her. The fluorescent lights in the law office of Nora Ellis buzzed with a faint, steady hum that set my teeth on edge. Sunlight barely pierced the heavy blinds, casting thin shadows across the mahogany desk. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on my knees, watching the attorney turn the pages of the document my husband had shoved into my chest 12 hours earlier. Nora placed the thick stack of paper down and folded her hands. She did not offer me a sympathetic smile, and I respected her for it. "This is a petition," Nora said, tapping the top sheet with her index finger. "It is a request for temporary sole custody based on allegations of emotional instability and abandonment. It is not an order. A judge has not signed this." I leaned forward, the leather chair creaking under my weight. "He told me he controls the trust now." "He is trying to panic you," Nora replied smoothly. "Custody and the trust are two entirely separate legal mechanisms. Your father set up a corporate trustee to manage that money. Travis cannot just walk into a bank and withdraw $8 million because he filed a piece of paper. But if you go back to that house right now and break down the door to get to your daughter, he will have the evidence he needs to win." My chest tightened. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to drive back to my neighborhood and pull my child out of that stranger's arms. But Nora was right. Travis wanted me to lose control. Nora turned to her computer keyboard and began typing rapidly. She explained she was drafting a formal preservation notice. This document legally bound Travis to stop deleting data from the family tablet, the home network, and any security cameras. I handed over my military deployment schedule, the call logs I had printed at the base lodging facility, and the shipping receipts for the packages I had found hidden behind the garage trash bin. 2 hours later, I stood on the front porch of my own house with Nora's paralegal standing right beside me. The young woman held a notepad, acting as a neutral witness. Travis unlocked the door, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He tried to block the path to the hallway, stating that the garage was off limits because it only contained old junk. I did not argue. I simply walked past him into the kitchen to gather Lucy's school uniform and my remaining civilian clothes, making sure the paralegal recorded every single item I touched. Paige hovered on the staircase landing. The blonde woman clutched the wooden banister, her knuckles white, watching my every move with a nervous, darting gaze. Then I saw it. The family tablet sat plugged into the wall outlet next to the coffee maker. This device never left the house. It stayed perpetually connected to our home wireless network, synced directly to Lucy's restricted child account. My daughter did not own a smartphone and never took electronics to her second-grade classroom. I picked up the tablet, noticing my name was still active on the shared administrator profile. I swiped the screen open and navigated straight to the communication settings. My hands moved quickly, opening my phone camera to document exactly what I found. My phone number was completely blocked. The notification alerts for my contact profile were manually disabled, and the incoming call history from the past 8 months was entirely wiped clean. "Put that down," Travis snapped, suddenly appearing beside the kitchen island. He snatched the device out of my hands, breathing heavily, but it was too late. The paralegal had already noted the action, and the photographs were safely stored on my secure digital drive. That afternoon, Travis finally permitted a scheduled video call. I sat in my sterile lodging room, staring at the screen as the connection established. Lucy appeared on the monitor. She sat stiffly on the living room sofa, her gaze fixed somewhere near the floor. Travis sat completely out of the frame, but I could hear his heavy breathing close to the microphone. "Hi, sweetie," I said, forcing my voice to remain soft and steady. Lucy did not look up. "I need space from your instability." The words sounded entirely wrong, coming from an 8-year-old mouth. The phrasing was rigid, practiced, and hollow. "Do you know what instability means, Lucy?" I asked gently. My daughter fell silent. Her eyes darted off screen, looking at the empty space where I knew Travis was sitting. She waited for a prompt, but none came. "I love you," I told her, refusing to let the tears fall. I will call you tomorrow at the exact same time. The screen went black. A minute later, a text message arrived from Travis claiming that my aggressive questioning had severely confused our child. I forwarded the message directly to Nora, then drove straight back to the law office. Nora had brought in Caleb Ross, a digital forensics specialist, to begin parsing the data I had secured from the tablet. Caleb sat at a small conference table, comparing the school attendance records Nora had subpoenaed against the network logs I had pulled from my carrier account. I isolated the origin of the rejection messages you received last month, Caleb said, pointing to a highlighted row of text on his monitor. Specifically, the message on April 14th stating she never wanted to speak to you again. I pressed my hands flat against the wooden table, staring at the screen. Where did it come from? Caleb placed the printed timestamp document directly next to the school attendance record and the home router log. Lucy could not have sent this, Caleb said. She was checked into class. The message came from the tablet in your house. Caleb's words hung in the quiet conference room. The message rejecting me had been sent from my own kitchen, typed on a screen my daughter could not possibly have touched at that exact moment. 2 days later, Nora secured a neutral meeting at a local family therapy center. The room smelled overwhelmingly of lemon disinfectant and stale coffee. Lucy sat on the far end of a floral-patterned sofa, clutching a stuffed plush rabbit that I did not recognize. The tag was still attached to the ear. Paige had likely bought it on the way here. "Hello, sweetie," I said, taking a seat in the armchair opposite the couch. My daughter kept her eyes fixed on the carpet. "You emotionally abandoned me." The words landed like stones on the glass coffee table. A child in the 2nd grade did not naturally string those syllables together. "Do you know what that means, Lucy?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly even. The 8-year-old blinked, her grip tightening on the stuffed animal. She recited another phrase instead of answering the question. "You chose the military lifestyle over our consistent maternal structure." I felt a sharp ache in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Arguing with a script would get me nowhere, and showing anger would only reinforce whatever lies she had been fed. Instead, I leaned forward and rested my elbows on my knees. "Do you remember the thunderstorm we had right before I left?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. The power went out, and we built a fort out of the couch cushions. We ate cold marshmallows with a flashlight under the blanket. A tiny flicker of recognition crossed her face. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch, and her mouth opened to speak. Then her gaze flicked past my shoulder toward the hallway. Travis stood on the other side of the frosted glass door. His arms were crossed over his chest, his silhouette perfectly visible through the translucent pane. Lucy instantly snapped her mouth shut and pulled the rabbit tighter against her chest. The momentary connection vanished, replaced by a rigid, practiced posture. She was terrified of making a mistake while her father watched. Later that afternoon, Nora handed me a printed document across her mahogany desk. It was a formal log from the elementary school counselor. The school official had spoken with Lucy multiple times in the weeks leading up to my return from the base. "Read the highlighted section," Nora instructed, tapping the page with her pen. The counselor noted that Lucy had been asking deeply concerning questions during recess. My daughter had asked if a child could lose their house if they did not love the right person. A week later, Lucy had told the counselor that her mom chose the military over her. Someone had spent months planting a deep, foundational fear of homelessness and abandonment in an 8-year-old child. Caleb entered the office, carrying his laptop. He set the machine down and plugged it into the wall outlet. The digital forensics expert had spent the last 48 hours tearing apart the cloud backup from the family tablet. "I rebuilt the timeline of the device," Caleb explained, pulling up a color-coded spreadsheet. "The night your number was blocked, there is a record of an incoming call from your base. The microphone activated for 2 minutes. The audio cache captured Lucy crying because she missed you." My hands curled into fists on my lap. I had suspected it, and hearing the confirmation made my stomach twist into a hard knot. Immediately after that call ended, Caleb continued. The contact was manually blocked. All subsequent messages from your number were deleted within seconds of arriving. The device logs confirm the deletions happened from the tablet on your home wireless network. But the most interesting piece of data was hidden in a secondary synchronization folder. The specialist clicked a file icon on his screen. The audio was grainy, filled with the ambient static of a living room, but the voices were unmistakable. "Say it again," Paige's voice echoed from the laptop speakers. "Mom chose the military over me." A small, hesitant voice followed. "Mom went to the military and—" "No," Paige interrupted sharply. "Looks sad when you say it. Mom chose the military over me. Try it again." The recording cut off with a sharp click. The air in Nora's office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the wood floor, and walked out into the hallway. The walls seemed to close in around me. I pressed my forehead against the cool plaster, counting my breaths, trying to block out the sound of my daughter being coached like a puppet in a tragic play. When I finally walked back into the room, Nora was waiting with a glass of water. I ignored the glass and looked directly at the attorney. "I am taking this to the house right now," I said, the words burning on my tongue. "I am going to play this file for Paige and ask her exactly how much she enjoyed torturing my child." Nora did not move. "That audio is strong evidence, but it is a recovered fragment. It needs full contextual authentication. If you confront her now, Travis will claim you hacked their devices or manipulated the file to harass them." "She is terrorizing my daughter," I replied, my voice shaking. "Do you want to win an argument with Paige?" Nora asked, her gaze unwavering. "Or do you want Lucy to feel safe enough to tell the truth on her own? If you use this file as a weapon today, you prove Travis right. You prove you are reactive." I stared at the laptop, the silence stretching between us. The lawyer was right, and it was the hardest truth I had to swallow since arriving home. I agreed to keep the audio file strictly within the legal discovery process. I would not ask Lucy about the recording, nor would I text Travis about my discovery. Nora nodded, satisfied with my restraint. She pulled a copy of the custody petition from a manila folder and laid it flat on the desk. Next to it, she placed the transcript of my meeting at the family center. "Look at the phrasing," Nora murmured, tracing the text with her finger. The legal document requested sole custody based on a lack of consistent maternal structure and severe emotional instability. It heavily cited the military lifestyle as a detrimental factor to the child's well-being. My daughter had repeated those exact adult phrases. Lucy had not simply been taught to resent my absence. She had been systematically prepped to act as a star witness for a family court evaluator. Every tear, every accusation, every rehearsed line was designed to fit perfectly into the narrative Travis had written for the judge. Caleb tapped the corner of his computer screen, drawing my attention to the metadata attached to the recovered audio fragment. The text displayed the exact date and time the recording had been created. The file was stamped at 9 o'clock at night, the evening before my plane landed in Virginia. The puzzle pieces suddenly snapped together with sickening clarity. Travis had demanded I send an estimated time of arrival through our parenting application. I had texted him from the airport, and again when I was 10 minutes away from the house. I had thought I was following the rules of our temporary deployment plan. In reality, I had been giving him the precise timing he needed to set up the smartphone camera and position Paige by the front door. They had rehearsed my homecoming before I even landed. The realization that my homecoming was a calculated ambush left a metallic taste in my mouth, but the real question remained unanswered. Why would Travis go to such elaborate lengths to push me out of a family he barely participated in before my deployment? 2 days later, the answer arrived in a thick manila envelope delivered to Nora Ellis. The morning sun glared through the office window, highlighting the dust motes dancing over the mahogany desk. Nora pulled a crisp, watermarked document from the stack and slid it toward me. It was a certification of trust from Atlantic Commonwealth Trust, summarizing the basic rules of my father's estate without exposing the private financial details. Travis told you that a custody order gives him immediate control over the $8 million, Nora said, tapping her pen against the wood. That was a lie designed to panic you, and probably a lie designed to impress his mistress. I picked up the heavy paper, scanning the dense legal paragraphs. The document clearly stated that an independent corporate trustee held the money. Neither parent actually owned a single dime. If he gets sole legal custody, Nora continued, leaning back in her leather chair, he can only petition to become a parental distribution advisor. He would have the right to request funds for education, medical care, and housing. The trustee still has the final say on every single. Travis had exaggerated his legal power. He needed me to surrender quickly, because a long court battle would expose the limits of his authority. The attorney opened a second folder and extracted a printed email chain obtained through our initial discovery requests. She placed it carefully on top of the trust certification. I leaned forward, reading the sender address. Travis had emailed the trust administrator back in February. I was completely isolated at the overseas military base at that time, believing my marriage was entirely secure. In the emails, my husband casually inquired if the trust could provide reimbursements for a larger family home in a safer neighborhood. He asked about the acceptable limits for private travel and whether the estate would cover the salary of a live-in caregiver to ensure family stability. A cold knot formed in my stomach. He had started planning his financial future with Paige months before he ever mentioned a divorce. Nora turned the page, revealing a photocopy of a school emergency contact form. My printed name had a thick black line drawn right through it. In the blank space below, Paige Nolan was listed as the primary caregiver. There was no signature from me, only Travis authorizing the change. He had been quietly building a paper trail of a new, stable family unit while I was shipping logistics crates across an ocean. The heavy oak door to the conference room swung open, interrupting the quiet. A tall, silver-haired man walked in carrying a leather briefcase. Henry Whitaker was the senior attorney representing Atlantic Commonwealth Trust. He did not smile, and he did not offer a comforting handshake. "I want to be perfectly clear," Henry said, taking a seat at the far end of the table. "I do not represent you, Mrs. Ward. I do not represent your husband. My sole fiduciary duty is to protect the beneficiary of the trust." "We understand," Nora replied smoothly. "We requested this meeting to clarify the advisor appointment process." Henry unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a bound copy of the trust bylaws. "Your husband assumes that sole legal custody automatically grants him distribution authority. It does not. The trustee reviews every application thoroughly." The trust attorney paused, adjusting his reading glasses. "Furthermore, he seems to have forgotten Section 12 of the grandfather's conditions." I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, waiting for the explanation. "Section 12 explicitly addresses intentional parental interference," Henry explained, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "If any parent or guardian engages in conduct that deliberately damages the beneficiary's relationship with a living parent, there are severe consequences." Nora sat up straighter. "What kind of consequences?" "With documented, credible evidence, the trustee can temporarily suspend all advisor powers," Henry stated. "If a family court makes a formal finding of intentional interference, the disqualification becomes permanent. The offending parent cannot receive personal reimbursements, and they are strictly prohibited from nominating a romantic partner as a paid caregiver or service provider." The implications crashed over me in a wave of sudden clarity. If Travis was caught orchestrating the alienation, Paige would lose all access to the money she was promised. Henry closed his binder with a sharp snap. "However, the trust does not decide custody. You need hard evidence and a judge's ruling before we can invoke Section 12. The meeting ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The path to protecting Lucy was clear, but the burden of proof rested entirely on my shoulders. Late that afternoon, a courier arrived at the law firm carrying a settlement offer drafted by the opposing counsel. Nora read through the proposed consent order, her expression darkening with every paragraph. Travis was offering a compromise. He would allow me 3 weeks of unsupervised summer visitation with Lucy, provided I signed over permanent sole legal custody immediately. "Look at paragraph 4, Nora instructed, sliding the document across the desk. The clause was buried under a block of dense legal jargon. It stated that Travis Ward would become the sole, exclusive point of contact for any and all financial entities regarding the minor child. He did not care about the summer visitation schedule. The visitation was a cheap bargaining chip meant to buy my signature on the financial clause. Caleb Ross walked into the office before I could respond to the insulting offer. The forensics expert carried a single sheet of paper, fresh from the office printer. It was a recovered text message thread between Travis and Paige, pulled from the limited data dump we received during discovery. I read the printed words. Paige had sent a message asking about the new house. Travis had replied 5 minutes later. The text read, "Education, security, a safer neighborhood. The trust can pay if we phrase it right." There it was. The entire custody battle, the rehearsed homecoming, the blocked tablet, and the coached tears. None of it was about love or stability. It was a calculated business transaction, and my 8-year-old daughter was the currency. Nora put down the consent order and looked at me across the mahogany desk. "He did not file for custody because Lucy rejected you," Nora said, her voice dropping to a low, hard whisper. "He made Lucy reject you because he had already filed for the money." The playback progress bar on the laptop screen moved steadily forward, silent and damning. I sat rigidly in the leather chair across from Nora Ellis, watching myself drop the gold-wrapped birthday box onto the hardwood floor. In the digital video, my shoulders were completely tense, and my voice trembled as I took a single step toward my daughter. The clip abruptly stopped right there. The footage of Travis taunting me with a smartphone camera had been erased. The seconds where Paige pulled Lucy away like a human shield were entirely missing from the file. The court was only allowed to see a tightly edited 10-second window of a mother looking unstable and a child backing away in apparent fear. Nora closed the media player and pushed a heavy stack of legal documents across her mahogany desk. "Travis filed an emergency motion at the courthouse first thing this morning," the attorney explained, her tone strictly professional. "His lawyer attached a sworn affidavit from Paige Nolan. The woman who rehearsed your daughter's traumatic rejection now formally swears that you were aggressive and unpredictable upon your return from the military base." The family court judge had not granted Travis permanent custody based on a single video, but the legal system operated on extreme caution when a child's safety was alleged to be at risk. The court issued a temporary order, immediately limiting my contact. I was restricted to 2 supervised phone calls a week until the formal hearing. I felt the cold air of the office settle into my bones. I had spent 8 months serving my country, keeping meticulous records, and doing everything required by our temporary deployment plan. Yet a spliced video and a fabricated affidavit were enough to separate me from my 8-year-old child. "Do not text him anything emotional," Nora warned, interrupting my thoughts. "Every message you send from this moment forward will become an exhibit in his harassment claim. He wants you to break the order." I returned to the bleak military lodging facility that evening. The walls of the small room felt closer together than they had yesterday, and the air smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner. The crushing silence was broken by the sharp chime of a text message on my phone. The screen illuminated the dim room, displaying a photograph sent directly from my husband. The image showed Lucy sitting at our kitchen island, eating a slice of pizza. Paige stood right behind her, smiling softly at the camera, her hands resting protectively on my daughter's shoulders. The caption below the photograph read, "She has finally calmed down after your outburst." My thumbs flew across the digital keyboard, typing out a furious demand to stop using our child as a pawn in his financial game. My heart hammered against my ribs, fueling the anger building in my chest. I stared at the blinking cursor, breathing heavily, and then I remembered the attorney's warning. Travis was building a paper cage around me, one fabricated incident at a time. I pressed the delete button, erasing every angry word. Instead, I typed a single, sterile sentence. "Please confirm Lucy is safe, and I will call at our court-appointed time tomorrow." Travis never replied to that message. He would later submit a claim to the court stating that my constant messaging constituted severe harassment, but the time-stamped reality would prove otherwise. The next morning, Nora and I sat in her office dissecting the sworn declaration Travis had submitted to the judge. Reading a lie spoken out loud was painful, but reading it formally documented under the penalty of perjury felt entirely surreal. The legal document contained 4 specific, calculated claims. First, the declaration stated that I had essentially abandoned my family, maintaining almost zero contact during my 8-month deployment. Second, it claimed Lucy had organically started calling Paige her mother because of my complete absence. Third, Travis swore that the $8 million trust had never been discussed in the presence of the child or the new caregiver. Finally, he stated under oath that his custody petition was entirely motivated by the need for maternal stability, completely unrelated to any financial motive. I looked at the attorney across the desk, shaking my head. Every single paragraph in the sworn statement directly contradicted the evidence we had already gathered. We possessed the military base call logs verifying my constant attempts to reach home. We had the shipping receipts for the hidden letters rotting in the garage. We had the text messages between Travis and his mistress, explicitly discussing how to phrase a request to the trust for a new house. The problem was that our strongest piece of digital evidence was not yet fully authenticated for court admission. Caleb Ross was still processing the cloud signatures on the audio file of Paige coaching my daughter. If we walked into a hearing today, it would be my word against a carefully crafted, formally filed lie. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I initiated the first court-mandated supervised phone call. The video connection established quickly, displaying the familiar background of my own living room. Lucy sat rigidly on the center cushion of the sofa. She wore a blue sweater I had bought for her last Christmas, but she looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched forward. "Hi, sweetie," I said, keeping my expression relaxed and my voice soft. My daughter did not return the greeting. Her eyes remained locked on the tablet screen, reading from something placed just below the camera lens. "I do not feel safe talking to you right now," Lucy recited in a flat, monotone voice. The pain in my chest was sharp and immediate. Hearing my own child read a script of fear was worse than any physical wound I could imagine. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept my voice perfectly level. "Where are you sitting, Lucy?" I asked gently. The 8-year-old blinked, momentarily confused by the deviation from the script. She looked nervously to her left, gazing entirely off camera. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, picking up clearly through the tablet's microphone, a faint, deep voice whispered from the corner of the room, "Say the rest." It was Travis. He was standing right there, just out of frame, feeding her the lines she was supposed to deliver to the court monitor. Before I could speak, the screen went completely black. The call disconnected. I sat in the sterile lodging room, holding a silent phone, realizing my husband was rapidly tightening his grip on her reality. I immediately saved the screen recording of the brief interaction, praying the background audio was clear enough for the forensics expert to isolate. The aggressive legal maneuvers from opposing counsel forced the court's hand. Because of the emergency motion and the complex financial implications involving a major corporate trust, The judge pushed our initial hearing forward on the calendar. We were scheduled to appear in family court in less than 2 weeks. Nora called me back into her office the following afternoon. The heavy blinds were drawn tight against the bright Virginia sun, and the attorney was reviewing the official witness list submitted by Travis's legal team. She did not look worried. In fact, a small, cold smile touched the corners of her mouth as she traced a line down the page. "Travis believes this accelerated timeline is his winning move," Nora explained, sliding the printed document across the table. "He thinks his spliced video and his sworn declarations will overwhelm the judge before we have time to authenticate our digital forensics. He wants to win fast." I picked up the paper, scanning the typed names. Travis was calling himself to the stand. He was calling Paige Nolan to testify about her role as a dedicated caregiver. He even listed a few neighbors who would testify to seeing the new couple acting as a stable family unit in the front yard. Then my eyes landed on the final name on the list. "He subpoenaed Henry Whitaker," I said, my brow furrowing in confusion. "Your husband is arrogant," the lawyer replied, leaning back in her heavy leather chair. "He needs to prove to the family court that acquiring sole legal custody automatically makes him the parental distribution advisor. He wants the judge to see that blocking him from custody is blocking the child from her vast financial resources. So, he ordered the senior trust attorney to take the stand and confirm those exact rules on the public record." The memory of our tense meeting with the silver-haired trust representative flooded my mind. Henry had specifically outlined the severe penalties for parental interference. He had explained Section 12 of my father's bylaws, detailing how any documented attempt to damage my relationship with Lucy would trigger an immediate suspension of advisor powers. The clause explicitly stated that a parent engaging in intentional alienation would be permanently disqualified from touching a single dollar of the estate, and they could never nominate their romantic partner for a paid caregiver role. Travis had not read the fine print. The man I married had only ever seen the summary certification, and he simply assumed the $8 million followed the custody order without any moral conditions attached. By legally compelling the trust attorney to testify, my husband had just guaranteed the presence of the one man who understood the trap. Nora picked up her silver pen, tapping it rhythmically against the edge of the mahogany desk. She looked at the witness list one last time before meeting my gaze. "Travis just invited the man who can take the trust away from him." The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung shut, sealing out the oppressive, humid July heat of the Virginia coastline. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, blowing cold air that made my skin prickle under my blazer. Travis walked down the center aisle, looking like a man who had already secured a winning lottery ticket. He wore the expensive, tailored navy suit I had purchased for our anniversary 3 years ago. Paige Nolan walked half a step behind him, her blonde hair pulled into a severe conservative bun. They sat close together at the petitioner's table, radiating the quiet, manufactured confidence of a perfectly stable family. Lucy was absent. The judge had wisely mandated her exclusion to shield the 8-year-old child from the legal crossfire. My attorney, Nora Ellis, arranged her manila folders on our wooden defense table with clinical exactness. She did not spare a single glance at my husband. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed firmly on the man in the black robe, seated high above us on the bench. Travis's attorney stood up, straightening his tie, and immediately projected the spliced video of my homecoming onto the courtroom monitor. The digital audio echoed harshly against the cavernous, wood-paneled walls. The footage showed my daughter violently backing away, her small face pressed tightly against a stranger's shoulder, while my own voice trembled with barely contained panic. The clip lasted exactly 10 seconds. It was carefully edited, entirely removing the moments where Travis taunted me and Paige physically pushed Lucy backward. The opposing counsel used the fabricated footage to paint a horrifying picture of a terrified child and an aggressive, emotionally detached military mother who had callously abandoned her family for 8 months. I sat perfectly rigid in my chair, my hands resting flat on my skirt, forcing myself to endure the public humiliation without flinching. When the screen finally went dark, Nora stood up and walked smoothly to the center podium. She carried a thick, heavy binder containing the communication timeline our digital forensics expert had assembled over the past week. The petitioner claims my client made absolutely zero effort to contact her daughter during an 8-month overseas deployment, Nora began, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room. She opened the binder and placed a thick stack of printed shipping receipts on the edge of the judge's bench. These are official military postal records. My client mailed over 60 individual letters, postcards, and care packages to her home address. We have time-stamped photographic evidence, verified by an independent legal paralegal, proving every single envelope remains completely unopened, hidden behind a plastic recycling bin in the petitioner's garage. Travis leaned forward abruptly, his face flushing a dark, angry red. He whispered fiercely to his lawyer, who immediately stood up to object, claiming I had only mailed those packages to fraudulently build a legal record. Nora did not miss a single beat. She reached into her folder, pulled out the blue envelope I had found in the trash, and held it up for the entire court to see. The military postmark on this specific letter is dated early February. That is 4 months before Mr. Ward ever filed a petition for custody. He intercepted this mail long before any legal dispute existed, deliberately and systematically severing an 8-year-old child's connection to her mother. The judge adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, making a sharp, forceful note on his yellow legal pad. The heavy wooden gavel came down as he ordered the strict preservation of every physical package currently residing in that house, warning Travis that any destruction of evidence would result in severe contempt charges. Despite the setback, the opposing counsel quickly shifted tactics and called their star witness to the stand. Henry Whitaker walked to the front of the courtroom, his silver hair catching the bright fluorescent light. The senior attorney for Atlantic Commonwealth Trust raised his right hand, swore his oath to tell the truth, and took a seat in the wooden witness box, his expression entirely neutral and unreadable. Travis's lawyer wasted no time. He asked Henry to explicitly confirm the basic administrative rules of the $8 million trust. Specifically, he demanded to know if the person holding permanent sole legal custody of the minor beneficiary would naturally assume the lucrative role of parental distribution advisor. A sole legal custodian may certainly be considered for the advisory position, Henry replied smoothly, adjusting the microphone in front of him. The appointment allows that individual to submit funding requests for housing, private education, and medical care. However, the corporate trustee must rigorously approve all requests. It is not an automatic transfer of wealth. Travis smiled anyway. The slight, arrogant, upward curve of his mouth signaled his premature victory. He had successfully established his financial motive on the public record, carefully disguised as deep parental concern. My husband genuinely believed he had just legally cemented his path to the money, proving that blocking him from custody would financially harm the child. Nora stood up for her cross-examination. She did not bring a notepad or a binder to the podium. She simply folded her hands and looked directly at the witness. "Mr. Whitaker," Nora said, her tone conversational but sharp enough to cut glass, "does eligibility for the advisor position depend solely on a family court custody order, or are there other constraints?" Henry opened the heavy leather binder resting on his lap. "No, it does not. The trust bylaws contain specific moral and behavioral conditions established by the child's grandfather." "Could you read Section 12 for the court?" Nora asked, stepping back from the podium. The courtroom fell completely silent. The ambient hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded deafening. Travis's confident smile vanished instantly, replaced by a rigid, wide-eyed stare. He gripped the edge of his table so hard his knuckles turned white. Henry cleared his throat and read directly from the heavy, watermarked parchment. Section 12 dictates that any parent or guardian who engages in intentional interference, deliberately damaging the beneficiary's relationship with a living parent, will face immediate consequences. Upon the presentation of credible documented evidence, the trustee will temporarily suspend all advisor powers. The trust attorney paused, letting the heavy, devastating words settle over the room, and then continued reading. If a family court confirms the intentional interference, the disqualification becomes entirely permanent. Furthermore, the offending parent is strictly prohibited from receiving personal reimbursements of any kind, and they cannot legally nominate a romantic partner to serve as a paid caregiver, educator, or vendor for the child. Paige Nolan's posture completely collapsed. The blonde woman sank lower into her wooden chair, the blood draining entirely from her face until she looked sickly pale. She had spent months rehearsing my daughter, acting as the perfect replacement mother, entirely because Travis promised her a new, luxurious house and a fully funded lifestyle. Now, in the span of 30 seconds, she realized she was legally barred from ever touching a single cent of that inheritance. The opposing counsel scrambled desperately to repair the catastrophic damage. He argued loudly that no interference had ever occurred, aggressively repeating the fabricated lie that I had simply abandoned my family and refused to call home. Nora returned calmly to our defense table and picked up the digital forensics report. She laid out the irrefutable data Caleb Ross had extracted from our home wireless network over the weekend. She detailed the 60 missed calls, the exact minute my contact profile was manually blocked on the family tablet, and the massive, frantic deletion of communication history that occurred the night I returned home from the base. The account settings were altered from a device located inside the marital home, utilizing the petitioner's local internet connection, Nora explained, pointing directly at Travis. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated, technological effort to isolate an 8-year-old child and manipulate her reality. The judge did not need to hear the entire coaching audio file today. The verified metadata, the physical presence of the hidden letters, and the undeniable network logs were more than enough to establish a deeply concerning pattern of severe emotional manipulation. The man in the black robe folded his hands on his high desk, looking down at my husband with undisguised, cold sternness. "The request for emergency sole custody is firmly denied," the judge announced, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. He did not grant me permanent custody right then, which Nora had wisely warned me to expect. The legal system moved methodically, prioritizing the slow, careful establishment of facts over sudden emotional victories. Instead, the judge appointed a formal custody evaluator, Dr. Elena Morales, to conduct a thorough psychological review of our entire family dynamic. He ordered immediate therapeutic contact between Lucy and me, strictly banned both parents from discussing the lawsuit or the trust with the child, and issued a binding, absolute data preservation order for all electronic devices in the household. Before the heavy wooden gavel could fall, Henry Whitaker stood up from the witness box, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, based on the preliminary evidence presented today regarding communication interference, Atlantic Commonwealth Trust is placing an immediate temporary suspension on all advisor requests from Mr. Kminster, Ward, pending the evaluator's final report." Travis sat completely frozen in his chair. The man who had walked into the courthouse fully expecting to secure his vast financial empire now found himself entirely locked out. He lost his emergency motion, triggered a mandatory psychological evaluation, and lost his only path to the trust account. The oppressive, humid heat hit us the moment we pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse lobby. I stood near the massive stone pillars with Nora, waiting for Caleb to pull our car around the circular driveway. A few yards away, Travis and Paige stood near the edge of the sprawling parking lot. They were not holding hands anymore. The carefully crafted illusion of their stable, happy partnership had shattered into pieces the moment Section 12 was read aloud. Travis jabbed his index finger aggressively toward Paige's chest, his face contorted in a vicious, ugly scowl, his voice carried sharply across the heated concrete pavement. "You blocked the tablet," he snarled, loudly enough for anyone standing nearby to hear. "You were the one who coached her. You ruined this entirely." Paige stood completely still, her eyes wide with absolute shock and betrayal. She stared at the man who had promised her a new life, finally realizing that he fully intended to make her the sole scapegoat for the entire criminal conspiracy. He was going to throw her to the wolves to save his own reputation and his freedom. The mistress turned around and walked away from him, her heels clicking rapidly and unevenly against the black asphalt, leaving Travis standing completely alone in the blinding afternoon sun. Nora touched my arm lightly, signaling that our car had arrived at the curb. As I turned to follow my attorney, her cellular phone buzzed sharply in her hand. She glanced at the illuminated screen, stopping abruptly on the sidewalk. "Megan," Nora said softly, holding the device out for me to read. The text message was from an unknown number, but the context made the sender immediately and undeniably obvious. The glowing words confirmed that the suffocating balance of power had finally shifted permanently in our direction. "Travis told me to destroy the phone. I didn't. If you protect me from him, I'll show you everything." The text message glared against the glass screen of Nora Ellis's cellular phone. The words promised everything we needed, but trusting the woman who had helped terrorize my daughter felt like swallowing broken glass. 2 days later, Paige Nolan sat across from me in the law firm conference room. She did not look like the confident, perfect replacement mother who had smirked in the courthouse. Her blonde hair hung loose and unwashed around her pale face. She wore a wrinkled gray sweater, her hands trembling as she clutched a paper coffee cup. A public defender she had hired for legal protection sat rigidly beside her. I sat next to Nora, keeping my hands perfectly still on the polished mahogany table. I refused to offer the other woman an ounce of comfort. "I only wanted Lucy to feel loved," Paige whispered, staring down at her coffee. "Travis told me you were never coming back. He said she needed a stable maternal figure." My jaw tightened. The urge to scream at her was overwhelming, but screaming would not help my custody case. I leaned forward slightly, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Loving a child does not include teaching her to believe her mother abandoned her," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "You do not get to play the victim today." Paige flinched, shrinking back into her chair. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, nodding toward the center of the table. The mistress reached into her oversized leather purse. She pulled out a smartphone with a severely cracked screen and slid it across the wood. The device came to rest right in front of Caleb Ross, our digital forensics expert. "Travis told me to smash this with a hammer and throw it in the harbor," Paige explained, her voice cracking. "He bought me a new device yesterday morning. But after he blamed me in the parking lot, I realized he was setting me up to take the fall for the entire custody fraud." Caleb immediately plugged the cracked device into his laptop, initiating a secure forensic imaging process to preserve the data chain of custody. He tapped his keyboard, extracting the hidden files while Nora reviewed the immunity agreement. The document only protected Paige regarding the physical transfer of the device, explicitly leaving her responsible for her own actions in family court. The room fell silent except for the quiet clicking of the computer keys. 10 minutes later, Caleb cleared his throat and turned his monitor so Nora and I could see the screen. "I found a digital note application saved in the local memory," Caleb reported. "The file is titled, 'Things Lucy Needs to Remember.'" Nora read the text aloud. The contents were sickening. The document contained a bulleted list of phrases, matching the exact adult vocabulary Lucy had recited to the school counselor and the family evaluator. The words, consistent maternal structure and emotional instability were highlighted in bold text. Worse than the vocabulary were the specific behavioral instructions. A line at the bottom read, "Tell her not to cry when she talks about Megan, but she needs to look sad and cry when she talks about me." I closed my eyes, picturing my 8-year-old daughter trying to memorize those cruel stage directions. I rehearsed those lines with her, Paige admitted, wiping a tear from her cheek, but I did not write them. Travis typed that entire script on his computer and sent it to my phone. Check the creation metadata. Caleb clicked a few buttons, confirming the file originated from Travis's primary email address. The evidence clearly established my husband as the primary author of the psychological abuse, but the forensics expert was not finished digging through the recovered data. There is a secondary message thread here, Caleb noted, his brow furrowing. It is a conversation between Travis and a man named Greg, dated 3 weeks before the deployment ended. The specialist expanded the window, displaying the private exchange. Travis had texted his friend about the risks of the trust plan. Greg had asked what would happen if the corporate trustee rejected the financial request for the new house. Travis had replied with cold, calculating precision. He wrote that if the trust blocked the money, he would simply dump Paige, fake a tearful reconciliation with Megan, and keep living in the marital home to maintain his access to Lucy. Paige stared at the screen, her breath hitching in her throat. She had believed Travis was fighting a custody battle to build a beautiful new life with her. The text messages proved she was completely disposable. She was nothing more than a convenient tool to extract $8 million, and he had a backup plan to erase her entirely if the primary strategy failed. The blonde woman buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly into her palms. She had sacrificed her reputation and terrorized a child for a man who never viewed her as a permanent partner. Nora ignored the crying woman, directing Caleb to search for the specific date of my return from the military base. We needed concrete proof that the homecoming ambush was a coordinated effort. Look at the text logs from that afternoon, Nora instructed, tapping the edge of the monitor. The digital timeline appeared, displaying the routine messages I had sent to Travis. Because our temporary deployment plan required strict travel updates, I had texted him when my flight landed, when I left the airport in the taxi, and when I was exactly 10 minutes away from the neighborhood. I had thought I was simply being a responsible co-parent. Instead, the timeline revealed Travis immediately forwarding my estimated arrival times to Paige, who was waiting inside the house. He knew your exact arrival window, Caleb said, tracing the timestamps with his cursor. He did not use secret tracking software. He used your own compliance against you. The final piece of evidence emerged from a hidden audio folder. Caleb located a voice note Travis had recorded and sent to Paige the night before my flight landed. The specialist pressed the playback button, allowing my husband's voice to fill the tense conference room. "Make sure Lucy calls you Mom when Megan walks in," Travis commanded through the small speakers. "We need the reaction to look natural. Put your phone on the bookshelf near the hallway and hit record as soon as she texts that she is 10 minutes out. Push Megan until she snaps." The recording confirmed everything. The most traumatic moment of my life, the moment my daughter looked at me with absolute hatred, was not a natural reaction. It was a meticulously directed stage play, perfectly timed, using my own arrival updates. Paige looked up, her mascara running down her pale cheeks. I set up the camera right where he told me. I whispered to Lucy to run to me the second we heard the key in the lock. "Thank you for the device," Nora said, her tone professional and devoid of sympathy. "We have what we need. You may leave." Paige and her lawyer exited the office quickly, leaving the three of us alone with the mountain of digital proof. We had the smoking gun required to destroy Travis in family court and permanently invoke Section 12 of the trust bylaws. However, Travis was not going to simply surrender. Less than 48 hours later, Travis and his legal team launched a vicious counterattack. His lawyer filed an emergency motion to suppress the cracked smartphone entirely. The opposing counsel claimed Paige Nolan was a severely obsessed, rejected lover who had fabricated the voice notes and altered the text messages to exact revenge after Travis ended their relationship. Nora read the motion aloud while pacing across her office. He is arguing the chain of custody is compromised because the device was in her possession for a week after they separated. He wants the judge to throw out the script, the text messages, and the audio recording. I felt a spike of panic in my chest. Can the judge actually do that? A judge can exclude evidence if the authenticity is reasonably in doubt, Nora explained, stopping near the window. Travis knows he cannot win on the facts, so he is attacking the integrity of the data itself. Caleb looked up from his laptop, rubbing his tired eyes. The raw files are on this phone, but Paige wiped the primary cloud backup, trying to hide her tracks before she flipped. I can prove Travis sent these messages, but I have to pull the deep server logs from the cellular provider to match the encrypted signatures. If I just walk in with this cracked phone, his lawyer will tear it apart on cross-examination. How long do you need to authenticate the deep server data? I asked, gripping the edge of the table. 2 weeks, Caleb replied, pulling up a complex loading screen. I have to cross-reference the device identifiers with the network routing logs to prove the voice note could only have come from Travis's personal phone. Our final custody hearing was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from today. The timing was terrifyingly close. If Caleb failed to verify the cloud signatures before we stood in front of the judge, our strongest evidence would be completely excluded, and Travis might succeed in painting his mistress as a crazy liar. I walked out of the law firm that evening, the heavy Virginia heat wrapping around me like a damp blanket. I sat in my rental car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel while the city traffic moved sluggishly past the parking lot. The silence of the car offered no comfort. My mind kept looping back to the audio file Caleb had played in the conference room. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block the memory, but the sound of my husband's voice echoed relentlessly in my head. Make sure Lucy calls you Mom when Megan walks in. We need the reaction to look natural. I closed my eyes, taking a long, ragged breath. The man I had married had written a script to break my heart, and he had used our 8-year-old daughter as the lead actor. The waiting room of the family court evaluator smelled sharply of lavender oil and sterile cleaning wipes. I sat on a rigid beige fabric sofa, staring at the closed wooden door across the narrow hallway. Behind that heavy oak panel, Dr. Elena Morales was speaking privately with my 8-year-old daughter. Nora Ellis sat in the chair next to me, typing quietly on her laptop. The attorney had advised me to expect a very long afternoon. Family court professionals did not rush their psychological assessments, especially when massive corporate trust funds and allegations of severe manipulation were actively involved. The silence in the waiting area felt heavy, thick with the anxiety I had been swallowing for weeks. To fill the agonizing time, Nora handed me a printed document obtained through a legal subpoena of Lucy's elementary school. The thick paper contained a formal written statement from the second-grade teacher. I read the carefully typed paragraphs, feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach. The educator noted a specific incident from late April. A military logistics delivery truck had driven past the playground fencing during recess. Lucy had sprinted toward the chain-link fence, pointing at the olive-green vehicle, loudly telling her classmates that her mother had finally sent her a package. When Travis arrived for the regular school pickup later that afternoon, the teacher cheerfully mentioned the truck. My husband had quickly pulled Lucy away, stating flatly that military packages were absolutely not for her, and she needed to stop making up stories. The next paragraph made my chest physically ache. The class had been assigned a simple art project to draw their family trees. Lucy had panicked. She drew a crude stick figure of Paige standing in the mother's spot, grabbed a pink eraser, and furiously scrubbed the construction paper until it tore right through the center. The teacher found my daughter hiding under a reading desk 10 minutes later. Lucy had asked, in a terrified, shaking whisper, if erasing someone on paper made them disappear in real life. A quiet click broke my intense concentration. The wooden door opened, and Dr. Morales stepped into the hallway. The evaluator did not offer a comforting smile, Her expression remained entirely clinical as she motioned for Nora and me to enter a separate, soundproofed conference room. We sat at a round glass table, the surface cold under my forearms. "I want to brief you on my methodology before we proceed to visitation," Dr. Morales explained, folding her hands over a thick clipboard. "I do not ask children who brainwash them. Direct confrontation only forces a frightened child to fiercely defend the aggressive parent." Nora leaned back in her chair. "What did you ask her?" "I asked very specific questions about her daily routine," the evaluator continued, glancing at her notes. "I asked about the home telephone ringing, the mail arriving, and the specific words she used during your initial meeting at the family center. Your daughter repeatedly used the phrase consistent maternal structure. When I asked her to explain what a maternal structure was, she could not define the word maternal." My hands tightened into tight fists under the glass table. Travis had forced her to memorize a legal script she could not even comprehend. Dr. Morales flipped a page on her clipboard. When I pressed gently about why she needed to use those exact words, Lucy became highly distressed. "She told me she had to remember the sentences perfectly, or else her father would lose everything and they would have to live in a car." The breath left my lungs in a sudden rush. Travis had not just bought a fake stuffed rabbit to win her affection. He had terrorized his own child with the threat of total destitution, convincing an 8-year-old girl that loving me would result in her father losing his home. "She does not hate you," Dr. Morales concluded, looking directly into my eyes. "She is carrying the terrifying weight of her father's financial survival. She honestly believes her rejection of you is the only thing keeping a roof over her head." The urge to drive to the marital home and break down the front door was almost blinding. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed my skirt, and thanked the doctor for her diligent work. The following afternoon marked our first formal therapeutic visit. The session took place in a small, brightly lit room, equipped with comfortable floor cushions and a low wooden table. A court-appointed therapist sat quietly in the far corner, observing without interfering. I walked into the room carrying the heavy wooden keepsake box. It was the authentic birthday gift, not the gold-wrapped decoy I had dropped on my living room floor a month ago. I brought no legal folders and made no mention of the lawsuit. My hands were empty of anything resembling a courtroom battle. Lucy sat rigidly on a blue floor cushion, her knees pulled up tightly to her chest. She watched me set the polished wooden box on the edge of the low table. The brass latch gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "This is for you," I said, keeping my voice gentle and undemanding, "but you do not have to open it today. It will wait right here until you are completely ready." My daughter stared at the box. Her small fingers twitched, but she kept her arms wrapped tightly around her legs. The silence in the room stretched for several long minutes, filled only by the low hum of the air conditioning unit. "Why did you stop calling?" Lucy whispered. The question pierced right through my chest, but I remembered Nora's strict instructions. I could not call Travis a liar in front of the child. I could not turn the therapy session into a cross-examination. "I did call, sweetie," I answered softly, sitting back on my heels to keep myself at her eye level, "every single Sunday. There are phone company records that show exactly when I dialed the number. But you do not have to decide who is telling the truth today. You just have to know that I never stopped trying to reach you." Lucy slowly unclasped her hands. She reached out and traced the smooth wooden edge of the box. The brass latch clicked softly under her thumb, and the lid opened just an inch. Inside sat 8 individual envelopes. I reached into the narrow gap and pulled out the 4th letter in the stack, placing it gently on the table in front of her. "Look at the red circle in the top corner," I instructed, pointing to the military postal stamp. "That is the postmark. It shows the exact date the mail was sent." Lucy leaned forward, her brown eyes scanning the faded red ink. The date stamped on the paper was March 15th. A sudden, sharp gasp escaped her lips. The date perfectly matched her spring school performance. Travis had explicitly told her that morning that I had forgotten the concert entirely, claiming I had not bothered to send a single message of support from the military base. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her eyelashes and tracking rapidly down her cheeks. "I am sorry," she sobbed, burying her face in her small hands. "I am so sorry I said those bad things." I moved across the carpet and wrapped my arms firmly around her shaking shoulders. She leaned into my chest, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of my shirt. "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for," I murmured into her hair. "You are allowed to love your father, and you are allowed to love me." The fragile peace we built in that room faced an immediate, calculated assault. 2 days before the next scheduled evaluation, my cellular phone vibrated sharply on my kitchen counter. The screen illuminated with an alert from the court-approved shared parenting application. Travis was legally mandated to use this secure software for all communication. The message he sent was officially directed to me, but the text was explicitly intended for Lucy to read over my shoulder during her next visitation block. The digital message contained only 4 words. "Remember what happened, Megan." It seemed like a vague, passive-aggressive threat to an outside observer. However, Paige Nolan had sat in our conference room and confessed that Travis used that exact phrase as his specific trigger code. It was a direct command instructing the child to stick to the fabricated custody script. I immediately captured a screenshot of the application and forwarded the image to Nora and Dr. Morales. The evaluator noted the blatant intimidation tactic in her official log, strictly requiring that all future communication pass directly through legal counsel to shield the child from further coercion. By Friday morning, Nora received the preliminary psychological report. I sat in her law office, listening as the attorney read the final conclusions aloud. The formal document unequivocally stated that Lucy Ward described 0 instances of abuse, neglect, or danger originating from her mother. The child's apparent fear was entirely artificial, deeply rooted in borrowed adult vocabulary and immense pressure to protect her father's financial stability. The final paragraph contained a devastating revelation. During a private moment at the very end of her last interview, Lucy had whispered a final confession to the evaluator. The night before my plane landed, Travis had forced his daughter to practice running past the front door, aggressively ordering her to throw her arms around Paige until the movement looked completely natural for the camera. Nora closed the thick manila folder and looked across the desk at me. The attorney tapped the heavy document with her silver pen, her expression grim and resolute. "The evaluator is submitting this directly to the judge today," Nora stated, sliding the final page toward my hands. I looked down at the highlighted text resting on the mahogany wood. The words formed the most powerful legal weapon we had secured to date, completely validating the months of quiet, agonizing restraint. Continued unsupervised pressure from Travis Ward presents an ongoing risk of emotional harm to Lucy. The final custody hearing began under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Travis sat at the petitioner's table, wearing a stiff, overly formal suit that failed to hide his mounting anxiety. Paige sat beside him, though she refused to make eye contact with anyone in the gallery. My husband looked entirely different from the arrogant man who had smugly recorded my homecoming. He was sweating, his fingers constantly adjusting his tie, and he kept leaning over to whisper panicked instructions to his legal team. Nora Ellis stood at the center podium, looking cool and collected. She presented our evidence with a surgical precision that left the opposing counsel no room to maneuver. When the spliced video of my homecoming appeared on the monitor, Nora did not simply let it play. She projected the forensic data timeline directly beside it. Every time the video showed Lucy backing away, a window on the right side of the screen displayed the verified network logs, clearly showing the exact moment my ETA text messages were received and the precise timing of the tablet camera activation. The jury of public opinion might have been swayed by a 10-second clip, but a judge watching the technical synchronization realized instantly that the entire scene was a meticulously directed stage play. Travis's lawyer stood up to object, his voice rising in desperate protest, claiming the voice note of Travis commanding Paige to make the homecoming look natural was a malicious fabrication. The audio file was authenticated by a third-party expert using encrypted cloud signatures, Nora replied, her tone sharp. We can play the full file again, and if the petitioner continues to claim it is a forgery, we are prepared to bring in an independent auditory specialist to verify the biometric resonance of his voice. Travis went silent, his face turning an ashen gray. He knew his voice was unmistakable. The most grueling part of the morning came when Paige Nolan took the witness stand. Her makeup was thick, covering the dark circles under her eyes, and she clutched the edge of the wood-paneled stand as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Under Nora's relentless cross-examination, the mistress finally admitted to coaching Lucy. She confirmed that Travis had personally typed the scripts on his office computer and forced her to practice them with my daughter for weeks. "Why did you do it?" Nora asked, her voice quiet but piercing. Paige looked at Travis, her expression shifting from fear to a bitter, hollow resentment. He promised we would have a new house. He promised we would be a family. He told me that as soon as he had sole legal custody, the trust money would make everything perfect. The mistress broke down in tears, but her confession was already recorded for the official court transcript. Travis stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the woman he had discarded the moment she became a liability. After a short recess, the courtroom grew deathly silent as Henry Whitaker was called to the stand. The trust attorney carried his leather briefcase to the witness box with the gravity of a man delivering a funeral eulogy. Travis's counsel tried to cut the testimony short, still clinging to the delusional belief that sole custody was the golden key to the $8 million inheritance. Henry politely but firmly dismantled that theory in front of the bench. He detailed the specific language of the grandfather's final conditions, emphasizing that the trust was designed for the child's benefit, not for the lifestyle upgrades of the custodial parent. Mr. Ward has consistently attempted to manipulate the beneficiary's relationship with her mother, Henry stated, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Section 12 is clear. The intentional interference we have documented today constitutes a direct violation of the trust bylaws. As of this moment, Mr. Ward is suspended from all advisory roles. He has no authority to request funds, no access to reimbursement, and certainly no power to nominate a romantic partner to act as a paid service provider. The judge leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Travis. My husband looked as if the floor had been pulled out from beneath him. The financial empire he had spent nearly a year constructing had evaporated into nothingness. Dr. Elena Morales, the custody evaluator, provided the final testimony before the afternoon break. She did not use flowery, dramatic language. She simply read the psychological findings into the record. She described the borrowed language Lucy used as a defense mechanism, a tragic script written by an adult to protect his own greed. She recommended that primary physical custody be immediately transferred to me, citing the urgent need to stop the emotional abuse and restore the child's sense of security. The judge took a brief recess to deliberate, leaving us in the stale air of the courtroom. I sat with my hands folded on my lap, watching the dust motes drift in the shafts of light. Travis was slumped in his chair, his head buried in his hands, finally facing the reality of his own destruction. When the court returned to session, the judge read his findings with a measured, detached voice. He ruled that the evidence of systematic communication interference was overwhelming. He found the sworn declarations submitted by Travis and Paige to be demonstrably false, constituting a serious legal misconduct that the court would address separately. He granted me primary physical custody, leaving Travis with strictly therapeutic supervised visitation. I was awarded final decision-making authority for everything regarding Lucy, including the critical access to her digital communications. The order prohibited Travis from discussing the lawsuit or the trust with my daughter, and Paige was permanently barred from any contact with her. "This court is not finished with the false declarations made in this case," the judge said, looking directly at my husband. "I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney for a formal investigation into perjury and potential fraud upon the court." The words felt like a cold shower of relief. Travis did not look at me as the bailiffs began processing the paperwork. He was already looking at the exit, realizing that his life as he knew it had officially ended. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom, not bothering to look back at the table where the man I had married sat alone in the shadows. Outside, the evening air had cooled. Nora walked beside me, her expression finally softening. "It is over, Megan," she said, squeezing my arm. I looked up at the darkening sky, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders for the first time since my homecoming. I knew the road to healing my daughter would be long and difficult, but for the first time, I finally held the compass. We were going home. The process of Travis moving out of the house happened the next day, overseen by a court-appointed mediator who kept the interactions sterile and brief. I stood in the hallway, watching my husband pack his remaining personal effects into a set of plastic bins. He did not ask Guani, "Is Guau ek Guani?" And he did not apologize. He simply looked around the empty living room, his face blank and devoid of emotion, before dragging his belongings through the front door. I watched him load the bins into his car. The man who had once been my partner, the man who had promised to stand by my side, was now nothing more than a stranger who had tried to build a fortune on the wreckage of his own child's happiness. I locked the front door behind him, turning the deadbolt with a firm, satisfying click. The house felt strangely quiet. I walked into the kitchen, the scent of fresh air wafting through the open window, and found Lucy sitting at the island, coloring in a new sketchbook. She looked up at the sound of my footsteps, her gaze hesitant but no longer filled with that programmed robotic fear. I poured myself a glass of water and set it on the counter. The legal battle had been brutal, but the trust remained secure. The corporate trustee had already initiated the direct payment processes for the therapy and school tuition, ensuring my daughter's future remained untouched by the greed that had nearly destroyed us. I took a deep breath and walked over to my daughter. She held up her drawing, a bright, messy picture of a tall green tree in the front yard. I sat on the stool next to her, watching her move the crayon across the page with a gentle, focused rhythm. The house would be ours again soon. We had a long road ahead of us to undo the damage, but I was here. I was not leaving, and for the first time in nearly a year, I knew she believed me. I reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Lucy leaned into my hand, a small, tentative smile appearing on her face. "Mom?" she asked, her voice soft and natural. "Yes, honey?" I answered, my heart feeling like it was finally beginning to beat again after a long, dark winter. "Can we go to the park tomorrow?" I looked at the girl who had fought so hard to find her way back to the truth. I nodded, smiling. "We can go to the park as often as you want." The victory was not in the judge's gavel or the trust documents. It was in that small, simple question. I had not won a war. I had reclaimed the right to be a mother. I had proven that love was not a test to be passed, or a transaction to be traded. It was something quiet, consistent, and waiting for us in the empty rooms of the home we were finally allowed to keep. The sun again is set over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the kitchen counters. I felt the last of the tension bleed out of my posture. I had saved her future, and in doing so, I had saved myself. We had a new beginning, a quiet life built on the foundations of everything I had defended while I was thousands of miles away. I finished my glass of water and watched my daughter fill the page with colors. The silence was not empty anymore. It was peaceful. I realized then that I had everything I ever needed. Everything else was just debris, something to be cleared away so we could see the light again. The house was filled with the sound of crayons against paper, the simplest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The aftermath of the courtroom battle felt strangely quiet, as if the entire world had been holding its breath and only now began to exhale. Travis remained entangled in a web of his own making, facing a district attorney's investigation that promised years of legal misery. His attempts to manipulate the system had collapsed entirely, leaving behind only the cold reality of perjury charges and a permanent, humiliating loss of access to his own daughter's inheritance. My husband was forced to navigate the logistical nightmare of his own professional and personal ruin without the cushion of my father's wealth. Nora provided updates that were as dry as they were satisfying, confirming that the court had ordered Travis to cover every cent of the forensic investigation costs and a significant portion of my legal fees. He was trapped in a cycle of court-mandated parenting intervention, forced to attend rigorous oversight programs that monitored every word he spoke. The man who once stood in our living room with a smartphone camera, recording my pain for a future court exhibit, was now the one under the microscope. Paige Nolan had disappeared into the anonymity of her own failure. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to a different city, likely hoping to escape the toxic reputation she had cultivated while playing the role of the replacement mother. She had sacrificed her dignity and her integrity for a promise of a life that never existed, only to be cast aside the moment the strategy showed a sign of weakness. I felt no urge to chase her. Her punishment was the inevitable result of her own choices. A hollow life spent chasing shadows while the trust she coveted remained entirely out of her reach. The house slowly began to breathe again, shedding the artificial tension that had clung to the walls for months. We lived in a state of carefully guarded recovery, focusing on the simple, vital rhythms of daily existence. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Lucy wandered into the primary bedroom while I was sorting through the last of the boxes from my deployment. She hesitated in the doorway, her gaze drifting toward the heavy wooden keepsake box that sat on the mahogany dresser. "Is it time?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I set down a folded uniform and patted the edge of the mattress. Lucy climbed up beside me, her small hands resting on the cool surface of the wood. I lifted the brass latch and opened the lid. The interior smelled of cedar and the faint, sweet scent of the dried lavender I had placed inside months ago. Inside sat the 8 handwritten letters, each one carefully dated and sealed. I pulled out the first envelope and handed it to my daughter. She tore the paper with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the ink I had written in a sterile barracks room thousands of miles away. The pages were not filled with grand speeches or complex emotional explanations. They were simple stories about the things I missed, drawings of the stars I saw over the desert, and gentle promises of the day I would be standing in the kitchen doorway. She read the first letter in total silence, her breath hitching occasionally as she turned the pages. When she finished, she looked up, her brown eyes wet with tears, and pressed the paper against her chest. "Did you really write one every single month?" she asked. "I wrote even more than that," I answered, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "These were just the ones I saved for you to open today." We spent the entire afternoon reading the correspondence, letter by letter. There was no mention of the lawsuit, no discussion of the courtroom, and no reference to the man who had tried to erase me. There was only a mother and daughter reclaiming the stolen time. I realized then that the victory was not found in the judge's gavel or the bank statements from Atlantic Commonwealth Trust. The true win was that she was finally sitting here, looking at me, seeing her mother again rather than the monster she had been coached to fear. I had protected her future, but more importantly, I had protected her ability to trust the world. The corporate trustee continued to send monthly statements to the primary residence, detailing the direct payments made to the private school and the specialized therapist who was guiding our healing journey. I held no power to touch that money, and I did not want it. Every dollar was used to secure the safety and education of the girl who was now free to dream, without the weight of her father's financial schemes hanging over her head. A few weeks later, Travis arrived at the designated community center for his first therapeutic visitation session. I waited in my car, watching from a distance as he walked toward the building. He looked smaller, his shoulders hunched, his walk lacking the predatory confidence he had once displayed in our marital home. He was a man who had lost his home, his reputation, and his grip on the life he had so carelessly gambled away. I did not watch the session. I walked to a nearby coffee shop, ordered a warm drink, and sat by the window watching the clouds move across the sky. I was finally capable of feeling indifferent. The rage that had once consumed my waking hours had dissolved into a quiet, steady resolve. I had survived his war, and I had built something better in the aftermath. My life would never return to the naive version of reality I had occupied before the deployment, but that was a blessing. I had learned to document the truth, to trust my own perception, and to stand as a wall between my child and the darkness of others. When I returned to the community center, the session had ended. Travis walked past my vehicle without making eye contact, his head down, looking every bit the defeated litigant he had become. I found Lucy in the waiting area, talking to her therapist about a drawing she had completed. She saw me, smiled, and ran across the carpeted floor to grab my hand. Her touch was warm, solid, and entirely real. "Mom, can we go to the library?" she asked, her voice vibrant and eager. "We can go to the library," I replied, pulling her into a brief hug. "We can do whatever you want." We walked out into the warm, late afternoon light, the parking lot stretching out before us like a blank page. The legal file on my passenger seat was thick and heavy, filled with the wreckage of a marriage, but I did not need to open it. Everything that mattered was walking beside me. We drove through the suburbs, the trees providing patches of cooling shade against the windshield. I watched my daughter play with the radio dial, selecting a song we both enjoyed, listening to the rhythm of her humming in the passenger seat. She was 8 years old, she was safe, and she was happy. Everything else was just noise. The lies, the false affidavits, the greed of a man who thought a child was a bargaining chip, it was all just debris that had been swept away by the truth. I pulled the car into the driveway of our home. It was the same house, but it felt entirely transformed. The silence inside was not the suffocating tension of the past, but the peaceful quiet of a home that belonged to us. I looked at the front door, the place where I had stood with a gold-wrapped box and a heart full of hope, only to be turned away. The past would always be a part of our story, but it no longer defined our future. I looked at Lucy as she climbed out of the car, her bright sketchbook clutched firmly in her hand. She turned back to look at me, her face illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun. "Are you coming, Mom?" she called out. "I am right behind you," I said. I turned off the engine and stepped onto the driveway. The air felt clean and sharp. I walked toward the entrance, leaving the ghosts of the lawsuit and the bitterness of the betrayal on the other side of the threshold. There were no more traps waiting in the shadows. There were no more scripts to memorize and no more tests to pass. We had spent 8 long months teaching my daughter that love was something she had to choose, and that her survival depended on her loyalty to a lie. That night, as she opened the first letter and began to read the truth, I knew that the weight of the past had finally been lifted. Love was never supposed to be a test. It was simply the act of being present, of holding on when the world tried to pull us apart, and of realizing that the most powerful weapon I ever possessed was the simple, unvarnished truth. We were home, we were together, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. If you find yourself walking through a fire similar to mine, remember that your maternal intuition is the most powerful piece of evidence you will ever possess. Never let anyone convince you that you are unstable for simply demanding the truth, and always protect your records with the same ferocity you use to protect your child. When the world tries to paint you as the villain in a story you never wrote, stay silent, stay documented, and let the facts dismantle their narrative piece by piece. Legal battles are not won by who screams the loudest or who makes the most accusations. They are won by the quiet, disciplined preservation of reality against an ocean of calculated lies. Never underestimate the importance of keeping every receipt, every timestamp, and every shred of evidence, because the truth does not always reveal itself on its own. You have to build a cage for it, brick by brick, until it is strong enough to stand against the storm. If you were forced to defend your role as a parent today, what is the one piece of evidence you would need to prove who you really are to your child?